Thank you all for attending. My name is Brian Horton. As the introduction was mentioned, I'm with CCI Systems, the Senior Director, Head of Wireless Division. I volunteered for this panel because I bought a company 3 years ago, and this past May sold the company. So I figured having gone through my own acquisition in both directions may have given me a little bit of expertise to speak with folks of your nature. But after seeing the resumes of these gentlemen, I'm in a different league. They're in a way different league than I am. So I just want to thank you for letting me host this panel, and I want to give each of these individuals up here a chance to give themselves their own introduction. Let's starting with Jonathan Adelstein to my left.
Thank you. Good to have you here. Good to be here. I'm Jonathan Adelstein. I'm a Executive Vice President with TWN Communications, which is an ISP in the Southwest. I'm helping them raise capital to help build out their network to rural parts of Arizona and New Mexico. Also been working on the BEAD process, and we can talk about how those two interrelate. Also, I used to be at Digital Bridge, which is a private investment manager, private equity, where we manage about $80 billion in assets along these lines. So got a lot of background there too. And before that, I was in government for a long time.
It's got some pretty impressive references, several presidents. So I'm just happy to be on stage with you, Jim. Thank you very much, John. Next, we have Derek Carrillo with Premier Law.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I'm Derek Carrillo. I'm with Premier Law. I'm a real estate and telecom attorney. I'm actually based in Florida. I live in Tampa Bay, but I work alongside a lot of developers, home builders, community associations to actually negotiate the contracts to bring in the broadband services, the cable, the internet, and also work on like the easement side and the due diligence and the land act side. So I'm very excited to be on this panel and learn from the other operational standpoint. So thanks for having me.
Third on our list here is another gentleman with another impressive resume, Mr. Tim Hoff with Deloitte.
Thanks, Brian. Like Derek, I'm on the professional services side. My name is Tim Hoff. I'm a principal at Deloitte Consulting. I work exclusively in our mergers and acquisitions practice, primarily in telecommunications. So I've been screaming for the rooftops for the better part of 15 years that there's going to be a lot of activity in the space. And as you guys all know in the room, it ebbs and flows, but we're certainly in a very active time right now. I spend most of my time helping either strategic companies or private equity funds assess if they want to make deals, if they want to go acquire a business, if they want to sell a business, or once that decision is made, helping them think through how to do it, how to bring the people together, how to get value out of it. So look forward to the discussion today.
And at the far end of the stage there, from Greenlight, the CEO, Mark Murphy.
Hi, thanks. I'm Mark Murphy, the CEO and founder of Greenlight Networks. We're a pure play fiber to the home provider in the Northeast, spanning from upstate New York down to Baltimore, Maryland. We've been active in the deal space recently over the last year, so looking forward to talking about that. And I think if I were going to go to market again, it looks like I've got my whole deal team here ready to go for all kinds of diligence and other activities.
Thank you, Mark. So folks, we have decided to take the agenda right off the advertisement for this session. And so we're going to talk about the 4 bullet points that were highlighted and marketed to you for this session. We're going to pass those bullet points on to each individual for comment and for question and answer. At the end of the session, there should be 8 to 10 minutes available for audience participation. So if you could respect that, unless one of the folks on the panel sees somebody out there that really needs a question answered right away. So we're going to dive right into it. Once again, this is Broadband Mergers and Acquisitions, looking back at 2025 and forecast for 2026. And so we're going to start with Jonathan first. Jonathan, give us a look back at M&A activity in the sector through 2025 in both rural and nationwide. Then also maybe throw a little spin on it regarding your take on BEAD and how that affected it as well.
Sure, happy to do it. I mean, it's been a year of kind of blockbuster deals. I mean, there's been a lot of positive momentum in 25 on these large fiber acquisitions. You saw Frontier Verizon, $20 billion deal, Lumen AT&T at about $6 billion, Charter Cox, $34 billion. These are massive. T-Mobile's been expanding out through JVs. And then we've seen some smaller regional deals, Ziply, of course, BC. But then I think that Mark can talk about some of the other consolidation that's going on. He's a prime example of what's happening in regional ISPs gobbling up their neighbors and coming up with regional synergies. So it's been quite a bit of activity on that large scale. And some of the themes you see are that the wireless providers, the MNOs, are interested in having sort of the full stack with fiber so that they can build more of a competitive moat, try to get the synergies that they can out of those, particularly in the markets where they're very deep or where they need to get deeper into fiber. The fixed wireless world saw, Starry coming out of bankruptcy and getting acquired by Verizon, which shows some interest in that as sort of and fixed wireless, of course, has been picking up a lot of subs. So you see that sort of there's an excess capacity issue where they can provide broadband through that, but now we're seeing expansion as sort of a complement around the edge where it makes sense, where you have fiber and you want to be able to layer on fixed wireless at a lower cost per passing, but probably a lower penetration as well. So in that sort of enthusiastic context is BEAD. And my sense of BEAD, and with direct experience as well, is what I'm hearing is it's been a bit of on hold because investors are having a hard time. We're having a particularly hard time trying to underwrite for it. They didn't know where the dust was going to settle, where it was going to shake out. The rules were changing. Of course, the election really brought them to stark relief. Those that were nervous before the election got more so and put pencils down for a while. The landscape is starting to solidify. I think we're starting to see activity pick up again. People are assuming that the way it looks is roughly where it's going to land. And by the time, if you start working on deals now, they get closed, you'll probably see them finalized, which is really important because a lot of folks won awards that they need capital in order to build out. So you'll be seeing some of that. Some of the companies were well capitalized going in and ready to go. But I think you'll be seeing quite a bit more activity pick up now because of the pent-up demand that resulted from some of the uncertainty that's now starting to settle. I mean, generally speaking, it's an attractive market. You mentioned rural. Rural has, less competition by nature, so it's got lower churn, higher penetration, slightly higher OpEx, but that makes it something that if you can get some subsidies to get in at, say, the same cost as you would for an urban area, that sub is going to have probably better, more stable ARPU and more stable returns over the long term. So you can play those two together to really have a long-term play in rural. Companies that really want to be in those markets, that know those markets, recognize the upside, are able to manage the OpEx, and makes them an attractive target. But given the BEAD situation, there's been some of these larger deals like simply have rural properties around them, but the pure rural play has been hard because you don't want to go into that if somebody else is going to get BEAD and build over it. If you didn't win in that market was at risk. So as I think the subsidy game comes to an end and everybody gets seated, we'll see that really attractiveness of that market attract capital in 26.
So Tim, I'm going to maybe put you on the spot there. As a follow-up, in your world doing due diligence, have you seen an uptick in private equity now attracting or going after BEAD awardees because of the fact that the money's there now? Or?
It's one of the reasons why the industry is attractive for sure. But I think Jonathan hit on one of the biggest points I was going to make is the uncertainty. I think uncertainty is the death of deals. So when we think about looking back at 25, I think there was an expectation going into 25 that telecom deals were going to continue to shoot through the moon because there was a very strong 2024. I think what we saw because of a lot of the uncertainty that Jonathan mentioned, geopolitical uncertainty, tariffs, interest rates, where BEAD was going to land with the administration, there was a lot of people on the sidelines, both from the strategic side, but also on the private equity side. So I think we are still at near record levels of dry powder or cash sitting on private equity balance sheets over $2 trillion.
Really? Okay.
So they want to make deals. They want to exit out of deals they've already made. And I think there was a lot of hope that 2025 was going to see that to fruition. I think we're still cautiously optimistic to see where the year ends, but it's clearly not going to end as high as where it was at the beginning of the year where we were projecting. So we're just shifting out those projections. I think private equity is still active and wants to get in the space. So on the diligence side, to answer your question, we're seeing them look at every single deal. And I'm sure the gentleman on stage can talk about this as well. We're seeing private equity active in every sector of telecom, looking at every deal, just being a bit more, put more scrutiny in their investment and kind of waiting to see where the landscape's going to shake out with BEAD and with some of the other kind of larger strategics in the market. So a lot of that optimism has now shifted to 2026.
Sure. Okay. And Jonathan, you also touched on something near and dear to me. The company that acquired us was a wireline company, a soft services wireline company, and we were wireless. So now we're providing both options as well, just like you mentioned. So some companies might be looking to expand their repertoire of services offered from, fiber to the home to fixed wireless or beyond. So I can personally attest to what you're talking about, which is why I chose to be on the stage with you guys today. So, all right, thank you very much. Let's move on to the next topic then, I guess. I'm going to put you on the spot. Derek, would you like to talk a little bit about the consolidation trends in the industry that Jonathan started to touch on a little bit?
Yeah, and I think Jonathan touched on actually a good point too, which I'll come back to in regards to the AT&T Lumen. But I think 2026, if for those of you who don't know, it's the Charter and Cox merger and the AT&T acquisition of the Lumen assets. So with the Charter and Cox merger, I mean, to me, being a telecom attorney, this is like one of the biggest in my lifetime. I mean, I think it's bigger than when Charter got Time Warner and when they bought Bright House. And the reason is because now they've created the largest broadband competition. So it's really about geographic consolidation, not necessarily competition. They're basically just acquiring markets where Charter really didn't have a space, and then Cox didn't either. And then kind of similar on the AT&T and Lumen part, AT&T was just buying time and assets. Really, they're buying the fiber infrastructure. And I think that gets back to Jonathan's point is, so now AT&T had the fixed wireless solution, but now they have Lumen's fiber, and so now they can kind of bundle that together. And that also, they're going to hit some more strategic markets. I think Colorado, the Phoenix area, expanding into the Southwest, and then also trying to hit AT&T's goal of, I think it was 60 million fiber by the end of 2030. I think if there's an AT&T person in here, I'm sorry if I got that number wrong. Where I think it comes down, where I think it affects most everybody here, right, is the regulatory, because the operators, they're going to be championing, hey, we're creating jobs, we're creating next gen fiber. But then consumers, what are most consumers worried about? Money. Are the long-term price hikes? Is now my cable and internet package going to go, skyrocket through the roof? Why? Because now we're creating a huge behemoth in the Charter and Comcast. And I think the biggest consumer sentiment I've seen is the duopoly, the Comcast versus the Charter. And I think Charter's brand I think Cox is going to absorb the Charter brand and it'll keep the spectrum. But realistically, I think those are the big two poles. But I think next year is going to be huge for the consolidation. I think it's going to really impact the consumer. Now, how that does, again, it's uncertainty, right? So figuring that out is going to be an interesting play for beginning to next year.
Okay, so Tim, once again, based on the uncertainty aspect of it, what would cause private equity or a buyer to be more confident in this market?
I think obviously track record of previous success and then a plan going forward. I think one of the things they're looking at right now is what's the path going forward. A lot of, particularly on the enterprise side and on the consumer side, we're seeing softening, particularly from once you get outside of the top 2 or 3 providers. So once you look beyond all the companies Derek mentioned, how are the middle market providers effectively competing with all these new entrants into the marketplace, whether it's fixed wireless, whether it's other broadband providers or fiber providers coming in, what's unique to them? So having some sort of a unique value prop, in addition to just having fiber in the ground, is kind of what's differentiating assets, whether it be a brand that has had particular success in an area, whether it's a very specific enterprise strategy they've seen adopted. Private equity is looking for something that is more than just geographic adjacency, which is probably what the strategics are most focused on.
And Mark, having been a part of an acquisition not long ago, can you share a little bit of your experience going through that, on how you sold them to build their confidence with your company?
And why Greenlight? Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it goes back to Tim's point. Brand is important. I think we built an awfully solid brand. Where I'm right here. You can talk about it. And so we're very proud that we've been back-to-back Consumer Reports #1 ISP in the country. So I think for a lot of, especially founders, they take comfort in knowing that we've got culturally, and especially for the smaller folks. I mean, in the case of the Loop acquisition, this was an entrepreneur just starting out, wanted to do the right thing in his community, provide competition to Comcast at the time, who wasn't aggressively building out a meaningful broadband platform for that community. And so I think trusting us to go ahead and do that. And then on the other side, the investors having the opportunity to then come in and leverage our stock as currency and look to grow down the road as we continue to look at our own M&A plans. I think that was a win-win both for the founder as well as for the investors, because in a lot of cases, the investors also need a path out and a way to liquidate and monetize their investments, because as kind of TAM shrinks around them and the opportunities for growth reduce, they need a way out, and I think we were able to provide that.
Okay, Jonathan, you had a comment?
Well, yeah, I agree with what's been said. I mean, I think the big picture in consolidation is a lot of these large regional carriers have been bought up. So what we've seen in the last year, recent years, is that the few remain right now. So if you're looking at activity going forward, at some point there's got to be a change of ownership of them. But what you're also seeing is, I think Mark's a great example of Greenlight sort of gobbling up regionally and trying to put together some of these regional powerhouses that eventually can get into that funnel to be bought up, or sponsors are doing it. But I think one issue, this might be too in the weeds, but if you're really into what's going on in the sort of investment space, stepping back, investment companies have to get a certain return. Say they want to get an 18 or 19% return, and they've all pretty much bought up a lot of these regional carriers. And so who are they going to sell them to? If they sell them to each other, they need to hit their hurdles, and then it makes it hard for the next guy to hit the hurdle. So it's hard to see how this is going to play out. I mean, there could be opportunities through, I think, troubled or distressed companies that don't meet where they want to go. There's going to be, I think, synergies where regional carriers that are even larger might make sense. And then, maybe somebody's either going to overpay or get underpaid. It's the only way you can kind of square the circle on the fact that there's all this private capital. It's already been invested in, and there's not that many places left to go.
Thank you. So we'll move on to our third point, our third piece of the agenda here. We're going to turn back over to Tim. Tim, can you identify some key areas of investment and interest from private equity and M&A?
Yeah, I think we've talked about a lot of the trends. I think what I would look at looking into 2026 is kind of the middle market space. Jonathan already hit on this, but last year, I think headlines were big on telecom M&A, right? We talked about all the deals so far, and if you read the news, it looks great. M&A in the space is up. It's great for operators. It's great for investors. But what is not up is the number of deals. So the value of total deals is up about 28% year over year based on S&P numbers, which is great and sounds good. But deal activity, number of deals that have happened, is about flat. And the reason why that is because the top, as you would imagine, the top 5 billion, 10 billion plus deals only represent about 4% of deals in the given year. So it's then next to that next space of what's next year going to look like. So there isn't going to be another 5, 10 plus billion dollar deals in the space next year. I'm fairly certain of that. So then it's going to be how active does private equity be for that next year? Like Jonathan said, investing in a roll-up strategy takes more work than kind of cutting a big check. So it's going to take disciplined investment. It's going to take due diligence that makes sure that there's not only one asset that's attractive in a space, but a strategy to create something of size that would then be attractive to bring to the market. Private equity is going to continue to look at that. Private equity will also look at specialization. So even though the big wireless carriers are clearly looking at trying to have a more comprehensive value prop to the customers, once you get outside of those three companies, there's a lot of specialization, which we're all seeing in the industry. Most companies are getting out of non-core assets still because they just want to focus on connectivity. So towers businesses are getting rid of their wireless providers, services providers are getting rid of their data centers, and vice versa. So that's an area where private equity, I expect to continue to be very active. They are the first call, or the private equity industry is the first call when a company wants to kind of shed non-core assets so they can focus. So I think private equity is going to continue to be very involved in the space because connectivity serves the community like a utility. It's attractive, it's needed, it's necessary. Government will continue to invest in it. But also, from a business standpoint, once you kind of land those contracts, it is more or less a recurring revenue. So they look at it, it's a very attractive space. So it's continuing to find businesses where they have a customer base that can grow. It's ideal if you can build it as a platform and add to it. That's fantastic. That's another thing private equity will look for. And then finally, the last one I'll say is starting to bring together businesses that have some overlap and some size. The problem is that there aren't a lot of those kind of mid-sized providers left. But one of the benefits corporates or strategics have had in the market over the last 5 to 10 years is that, if you're bringing together two companies of overlap, you can take synergies out of the business, so corporates can afford to pay more. They can typically pay more than private equity. So if private equity is going to continue to be aggressive in the space, they have to look for other ways to either grow on the revenue side or take costs out of the business. And that could be through things like AI, so starting to leverage more advanced technologies to kind of look for smaller businesses that may be less professionally managed, or just there may be an opportunity to take some cost structure out of the business through modernization of technology and use of AI and things like that.
Okay. Derek, from a legal perspective, can you shed some light on some of the legal hurdles that need to be overcome in a large acquisition or merger of the two that you described?
Yeah, I mean, I think the FCC is going to be obviously heavily scrutinizing joining in the Cox and Charter. Again, more because it's about consumer sentiment, it's about consumer choice. And by creating the biggest now broadband provider, I think they're going to be more concerned about how is this directly going to affect the consumer, which again, we talked about is price. Is it the long-term price? Because, the short term, realistically, they're probably going to slash prices to build the rates back up and build that new brand. But realistically, over the long run is where operators make their money. So that's what they're probably more looking at the long-term investment from that. And then figuring out ways, like I said, with AT&T, the acquisition of Lumen, how can we provide these bundled services? I think Tim hit on it, that even a lot of some of the big providers, the T-Mobile, you see the commercials at $30 internet a month, and they build it into they're figuring out how can we bundle that to capture that client and keep them from going to a traditional fiber provider like a Comcast or something similar to that.
Okay, thank you. Tim, I did have a sidebar question for you. We're talking in terms of large mergers and acquisitions here. What if you're a smaller company? What if you're a boutique company out here, and you're looking to maybe have private equity invest in you? Yeah. How do you go about that? How do you start that process?
The beauty of private equity is that there's funds of every sizes, right? It's an attractive space for a reason. I think on the smaller end of the spectrum, you tend to see more kind of deal sourcing through advisors, through brokers. So starting from, and even from, going through your, if you have bankers or even your relationship banks. So there's always private equity firms talking to those advisors and looking for leads. Because I guarantee you this, there's more private equity funds looking to invest than there are opportunities out there. So it's a competitive landscape if you can find the right connection. So at the smaller size, it'd be going to kind of your brokers, going to conferences like these, talking to folks. There's a lot of investment conferences specifically around infrastructure, digital infrastructure. So it's pretty easy to find that community once you kind of get into it. And oftentimes when you find the funds that are focused on a size company like yours, it's a better match anyway, because there tends to be they're looking for a profile that would fit your growth profile versus a larger company.
Mark, does it typically happen more private equity comes to you, or you throw up a red flag and say, hey, we're available, or is it kind of in both directions? And can you speak from your experience?
I would say that the investment bankers also play a role in that, and they're pretty good at fleshing out those opportunities and leveraging the relationships they already have with private equity. In our case, Oak Hill is very plugged into the space. They've got a number of portfolio companies ranging from Metronet, who they just actually sold to T-Mo, to companies of our size, and they've got some good regional footprints, but they're consistently looking for opportunities in the space. They're a very good partner, knowledgeable about the space. But every private equity company is a little different. Some may not have that level of expertise. And so when challenges arise, it gets a little tougher. In my case, they also know everything that your peers are doing, and they can look at your KPIs and certainly challenge you if you've got anything that looks out of whack, which I would say generally is a good thing.
From personal experience, I can tell you that private equity did not get involved in the acquisition of my company. It was word of mouth at a conference just like one of these. So if you guys are a company and interested in talking about selling or being acquired or buying, don't be afraid to talk about it, because that's how it happened for my company. So private equity never came near, and thankful for that also. So, but any further comment on that, John?
Well, just, I agree with what's been said. I think that the big picture maybe of what areas of interest are going to be in 26, if we think about that, we've talked about a lot of the themes like, fiber by the wireless companies that are buying, the Metronets of the world. They're trying to get fiber, particularly where they don't have an existing relationship as the old RBOC, or in case of T-Mobile, they never were an RBOC. So that's the old regional bell for people that aren't as old as me. Building regional hubs is the other big. I think some of the small kind of deals that you're doing, Mark, are a good example of that. Or you've got middle mile, very, very hot. I mean, obviously the biggest deal of the century happened there with Crown and Zayo, but what's driving that is AI. I mean, AI ultimately is going to pump, I think, blood through the veins of the entire telecom industry. It's just going to increase the amount of data flowing through it, which is going to be accretive for, I think, all aspects of it. But it begins sort of in the core data centers and then works its way out to the capillaries, if you will. So companies that are in the middle mile space like Zayo are seeing big uptick. Crown in trying to service the training centers and the big data demands, but that's going to pass through, I think, deeper in the network. And finally, in 26, I think rural will heat up, as I've said before, because BEAD is going to be settled, and then there's going to be a search for capital to build that out, and it'll be competitive in terms of who did a good business model in carefully applying in ways that you could actually model would be successful financially in order to attract that capital. Some may have less luck than others. Just because you won BEAD, as we did in some cases, doesn't mean you won it smart. And so it doesn't mean you're going to be able to attract capital.
We won the contract. Oh no, we won the contract.
It could be a liability if you don't watch that.
Right. Great. Well, thank you very much. Mark, let's turn it over to you to bring us home. Any comments on the network build out versus management strategies of subject matter of the agenda?
Sure. And that was kind of the decisions we made this past year. We've been largely growing through just organically, through really building out our construction team, getting some consistency there. And I think from our perspective down the road for M&A opportunities, as a seller, potentially, I think there's a lot of buyers looking for a construction platform that can build it at a velocity, continue to demonstrate that they can scale, and just as importantly, that can do it at a price, and that can consistently come in at numbers that make sense, because there's a lot of ways to get these things built, and we've seen all kinds of different price points, and some of that gets into the BEAD discussion as well. Not every market's going to be the same cost per pass, which are the metrics that are important to us. So, first and foremost for us, it's making sure we've got a great construction machine. Secondly, it's looking at penetration. Can you actually sell in and hit the plan that you need to? Because customers are still really important to this whole thing. I think as we look ahead, I think there's continuing to be opportunities for us to look for tuck-in opportunities to acquire, because I think there are some good opportunities out there where there may be investors that are getting deep into their fund, where it's, if they're 7, 8, 9 years into their fund, they need a liquidation event or need to find a path to get there. So that creates some opportunities there. And then I think for us, the magic number is, if you can get to about 1 million passings, then you become an interesting target for some of the bigger guys to get to. So, if you're a long way from there, I think, it's not going to happen for a while. Private equity is certainly a path, but for us, build was about getting to a scale and getting consistency. The acquisitions or buys are more about getting to scale faster and making sure, like in both cases, they serve different purposes. The Loop deal got us a presence in Northeast Pennsylvania where we wanted to be, and it was largely a construction team that we're going to continue to be able to scale out. The FastBridge deal that we just announced gets us a bigger footprint in Pennsylvania and in the Buffalo area. Go Bills! And but that's largely construction management talent and other things. So different acquisitions bring different opportunities, but I think those opportunities will continue to present themselves for companies like us next year.
Sure. Okay. Final question for you, John. Mark touched on it a little bit, but you mentioned KPIs. So if I'm a smaller company, what kind of KPIs can I be expected to present to a potential buyer?
Well, I mean, they're looking very, very hard at margins. They're looking at ARPU. They're looking at churn. They're looking at long-term trends in growth. I mean, if there's one thing that gets you a good price is if you're growing at a rapid clip and you're able to maintain sort of operational efficiency and discipline in doing that. But they will look at historically on those KPIs at those operating metrics really closely. You're right. You really open up the hood and whatever you want to call it, and just getting a full.
EBITDA still counts for something, right?
Oh, EBITDA counts for a lot. I mean, but multiples of EBITDA might vary a lot based on some of these other KPIs.
Right, for sure. Well, thank you very much, folks out in the audience. We have a few minutes here for some Q&A, so it's tough to see with the spotlight. So can anybody? If you have a question, the gentleman back there in the gray shirt, yes, please feel free to address anybody on the panel.
Yeah, it just goes for anybody that probably can answer it. With Charter and Cox combining, is there anything that can be done to update their HFC network that it is more fiber oriented to the home rather than just fiber to a certain point translating to coax? So anything be regulated for that? Because for smaller ISPs that offer fiber optics in smaller communities, they would have the advantage over the HFC network, but a lot of customers don't know, which is something we deal with in Alaska because our competitor is a coax version company that says fiber to the neighborhood, which technically they're not lying, but it's fiber to their CCAP rather than it being fiber to the home, which a smaller ISP that offers fiber directly should have the advantage if the consumer knows that already.
I think.
Good. Take the lead.
So I always, my running joke is, Charter's always bringing fiber to the unit in Q3, and they've been saying that since 2022. So I hope with the consolidation they can, because I think Cox will be able to fill in the gaps for that. Whether they actually implement that or not is to be seen, right? I think that's the uncertainty of it. I hope so, because it's going to provide a better service. I think Charter doesn't have the best of services for that. I prefer, if you look at it like in my market, in the Tampa market, like fiber or Frontier just outpaces Charter like by miles. And then even same with some other smaller ones like a Blue Stream Fiber or a Summit Broadband. So I hope with the Cox acquisition that they make it better for the consumer and actually do, like you said, fiber to the unit, not just fiber to the the neighborhood. I'm gonna actually steal that. I like that. Thanks.
Okay. Next, the gentleman up here in the front and center here. Excuse me.
Hi, Drew Clark, Broadband Breakfast. Jonathan, I really liked your point you just made about data centers and the role that's going to play. And I think the blood reference was a positive one. I think. But I'd actually love the others on the panel's thoughts on this point, because I mean, it's kind of obvious that AI is eating the world, but we keep having these conversations about telecom, and I think that was our first reference to it on this panel. So, I mean, do you agree, or do you think that the AI tsunami is extracting value away from the telcos rather than importing value to you guys?
Mark, you want to kick off?
I think it's additive. I mean, I think the pipe is still important, and I think the use cases will continue to play out. But that there's a whole lot of money going into the building out that infrastructure. Fiber is a small part of that, I think. But I mean, I don't see it taking away from what we're doing. We certainly have access to all the capital we need to build.
Yeah, similar perspective. I think every 5 to 10 years, the prevailing messaging is going to waver in and out about the value of the pipe and the connectivity. But I think for the foreseeable future, the need to fund AI and then support it through ubiquitous connectivity is going to remain. And I think that's going to drive investment across the industry. And I think that's good for everybody in the room and up here. And so I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Let me just expand. I mean, the thesis behind investment in digital infrastructure is more and more data is going to continue to be generated, which has always been accurate. But you've also seen prices go down per megabit over time. But the increase in demand has always outpaced that. So the volume has gone up. So the idea of AI, I think, is that there's going to be more data going through the network. And it begins in the core where the training is happening, and you're seeing the biggest probably benefits go into the companies like Zayo that are doing middle mile to the data center. But increasingly, that's going to move toward the edge. And data centers will also move toward the edge for latency and efficiency, and the amount of bandwidth that's going to be demanded can be handled on the edge for inference. When the consumer actually asks a question and wants an answer, it doesn't always need to go back to the big training center, the vast data center in Northern Virginia. It can go to something in their region that's caching what's really interesting into its own compute, which means I think that my analogy I just came up with here was the heart is the beating heart of it all is sort of is AI, and it starts with the biggest or go into the big training centers, and then it builds out throughout the circulatory system deeper and deeper into the smaller veins and capillaries, go into edge data centers, ultimately on the phone. I mean, any of us who have done a search on their phone and getting a great answer on AI probably aren't thinking about the fact that that's causing some server somewhere to do some work and actually burning up energy and creating a fair amount of bandwidth going back and forth. When that little Bob is thinking through, says, I'm thinking about it, that's data being computed, and then it has to be transmitted. So I think it's a tailwind overall for the industry. And I don't think yet it's fully been thought through. It's got to be proven out in terms of how much that's going to happen at the edge. But it's already, I think, showing up in the numbers you're seeing from the Zayos of the world.
Time for one more question. I think the gentleman back here. Maybe more than one, if we can.
Yeah, just a futuristic question. You think about Jeff Bezos talking about data centers on the moon and all of those things. I do understand the aorta and the capillaries and all of it, but at some point, the cost parameters to build fiber and address that middle mile, last mile just become really prohibitive. And so at what point does satellite become an augmented way to drive that? And, right now we're probably not seeing a lot of local satellite providers, but I think that is going to happen in the near future. Any perspective on that?
That might be a different conversation for one of the other meetings we're having here. But I can tell you that I would believe personally that satellite is part of the M&A discussion when it comes to data transfer, because they're going to have to join forces at some point across the board to be able to meet all the demands of AI, as well as merging and partnering with fiber companies as well. So it's got to eventually be one big happy family. It has to be successful. There can't be any more us and them and so forth. And so in my opinion, you're right, low Earth orbit satellites are receiving the majority of the BEAD money. So somebody thinks somewhere that's an important investment. So from an M&A perspective, I think that's something that needs to be at the top of everybody's watch list.
I think what I'd watch out for there is innovation. I think the amount of money that's behind Starlink and Kuiper is unmatched in the industry. And so I think as they continue to have this portfolio approach of connectivity, there's just the ability to test and innovate and fail and is unmatched in really that sector of satellite. So I think it's something that I think the industry is paying very close attention to.
I always think of satellite as being strongest positioned as a last mile provider where there's not a lot of competition because they do have limitations on throughput. And it'll be useful for AI. We're seeing them increase capacity by both increasing the number of ground stations as well as satellites. People don't think about how the ground infrastructure is really helping them expand, but both of them help them expand capacity. But they're still not adequate to deal with the largest loads driven by AI that I was talking about. I mean, that require middle mile connections. Sure. And even for last mile, it's gonna where they have capacity constraints, it's gonna be, I think, a problem for them. So I think that it's gonna favor fiber and higher throughput technologies over satellite as AI demands more bandwidth. I think it would actually work against them. I think generally speaking, they're becoming more competitive, but it might not be able to keep up. Right now, most uses you can get what you need from satellite, but if it really begins to balloon through AI, they're going to be more constrained, I think.
I agree. You have time for one more question?
Just one last question, picking up on what Mark said. If you think AI is a tailwind for broadband industry, why does the stock market not reflect that? Why is the service provider at all-time lows while the AI companies are at all-time highs?
It's been a bad day for a lot of companies. I mean, we're seeing that tech bubble burst a little bit. You think about the bubble bursting in the internet age back in 2000, 2001. Eventually, those pipes filled up. The Williams or whatever that went almost bankrupt with their fiber, all that fiber infrastructure was needed for the internet because the internet did catch up with it. I think it's sort of a timing issue, in my opinion. It's a long term. I don't think, and I didn't really indicate that it was much of a tailwind right now for the ISPs, more a tailwind for middle mile, and it's helping them materially. But I think over time, just as the internet took off after the bubble burst in 2001, it is going to be a tailwind long term just because of the amount of data demand.
I would also add, just looking at maybe not the public markets, but in the private markets, the multiples on fiber to the home are still awfully compelling. So sure. I think that maybe it's just a function of private versus public right now, or just like you said, a tough time to be in the market. But I think right now the multiples are still pretty eye-popping for fiber to the home in particular. At least I hope they stay that way.
Okay, folks, I think that wraps up our session. Let's give a round of applause to Mr. Jonathan Adelstein, Mr. Derek Carrillo, Mr. Tim Hoff, and Mr. Mark Murphy. Thank you very much, everybody.